During a tense live talk show appearance, Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader Ibrahim Traoré faced unexpected disrespect from a smug, confrontational host. What followed caught the entire studio off guard. With composed words and a firm presence, Traoré swiftly took control of the exchange, leaving the host speechless and the audience stunned. The moment quickly went viral, displaying Traoré's composure, dignity, and unwavering determination. Monday evening, 6:45 p.m., Paris. Inside Studio 5 of the national television network, Leo Direct, cameras rolled and the atmosphere buzzed. That night's episode of Favor had been heavily promoted for weeks. The guest, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, revolutionary figure and current president of Burkina Faso. What was intended to be a civil interview had taken a different tone behind the scenes. The host, Marc Delarme, was known for his pointed remarks, sarcastic smiles, and subtle jabs, particularly toward African leaders. And this evening, he came ready. Traoré entered the studio with quiet confidence, dressed simply in a modest suit. No flashy medals or insignia, just his trademark steady gaze and resolute stance. He offered warm greetings to the crew. Marc, however, remained seated and did not return the gesture. The red light blinked on. Marc leaned forward with a forced smile. "President Traoré," he said, "should I call you that, or would Rebel Commander be more accurate?" A low gasp moved through the audience. Ibrahim's expression stayed calm, his face unreadable. Marc pressed on. "Tell me, do you truly believe you have the qualifications to sit at the same table as established world leaders?" What Marc didn't anticipate was that the evening would take a turn he couldn't control. By the time it ended, it would be his own reputation left in question. The studio went quiet. Marc gave a smug chuckle, glancing at the camera as if expecting praise. But the silence held. Ibrahim Traoré leaned back slightly. There was no trace of anger in his eyes, only a quiet disapproval. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned to look at the studio audience. His eyes paused on a young black girl seated in the front row, her expression full of hope. Then he spoke. "In my country," he said in a calm, measured tone, "we don't judge a man's worth by what he wears on his chest, but by how many children sleep peacefully at night because of his actions." The room held its breath. Marc shifted uneasily in his chair. "You've been accused of—" Ibrahim calmly raised his hand, not in defiance, but to interject. "Let me finish," he said, composed. The audience leaned in. "People like you," he began, measured and steady, "think power is wearing a suit in Paris. But true power is standing before your people when bullets fly, and choosing not to run." A murmur rippled through the audience. Marc's lips twitched. "Henry." Ibrahim leaned in slightly, his voice lower now. "You ask if I deserve a seat among world leaders. I ask, do they deserve to stand with their people?" Backstage, the control room stood still. "Health whip it," whispered one producer. The director, eyes fixed on the monitor, replied, "No, he owned it." Back in the studio, Marc tried to regain control. "That's poetic, Mr. President, but poetry doesn't stop terrorists." Ibrahim's jaw tightened for a moment, then softened. "You're right," he replied gently. "But dignity does. Hope does. A leader without hope is more dangerous than any armed man." Then, something unexpected. Ibrahim reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded letter. "This," he said, "is from a 9-year-old girl in Kaya. Her village was attacked. She lost her father. Still, she wrote to thank me for keeping her school safe." His voice wavered. Not from weakness, but from honesty. He began to read. And as his voice filled the room, a hush fell over the crowd. It wasn't fear. It was shared sorrow. When he finished, even the cameraman's hands trembled. Marc looked down at his notes, now meaningless. This wasn't just a panel discussion. It had become something more. A reckoning. And it was only beginning. The studio remained still. Ibrahim sat composed, unwavering. Yet the air was tense, charged under the glow of lights and whir of cameras. Then it happened. A woman stood, dark-skinned, modestly dressed. Tears streamed down her face. "I know you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "My father told me stories of leaders like you, men who serve their people, not profit." "Ma'am," the host tried to interject. "This isn't enough," she cried, voice trembling. "You mock him. But you don't understand what courage is. You've never had to defend a village, cradle a dying child, or stand alone against the world." The room froze again. Ibrahim didn't move. He locked eyes with her. "You're not just a guest," she said, her voice full of emotion. "You are hope." That word, hope, hung in the air. Mark fidgeted with his pen. For the first time, he seemed to understand. This wasn't only about politics. This was about pain, heritage, and pride. And someone had just woken a sleeping lion. By dawn, the internet had exploded. TikTok loops, YouTube shorts, reposts on Facebook. The woman's cry, "You're not just a guest, you're hope," spread like wildfire. 100 languages, thousands of shares. In every clip, Ibrahim Traoré sat still, dignified. No rage, no comebacks, just quiet strength. In Ouagadougou, students marched peacefully. They held signs. "Hope wears uniform. Our voices are no longer silent." In a Paris cafe, a little boy with African roots watched the clip on a tablet. "Is he a king?" he asked his mother. She smiled. "Something better. He serves his people." Meanwhile, Mark's employers weren't smiling. Sponsors grew restless. An emergency meeting was called. Online comments were scathing. And yet Traoré said nothing. No post, no tweet, no boast. Because when a lion walks, he doesn't need to roar. The studio called Ibrahim's team. "Please, we want him back. This time a full hour. No interruptions." But the president didn't reply right away. That evening, he walked quietly through the streets of... He visited a refugee shelter. No media, no announcements, just his presence. A little girl ran up to him and hugged him. "They say you're magic," she whispered. He knelt down. "I'm just a man," he said. "But magic happens when people believe in one another." Later, back at his hotel, his assistant handed him the official invitation for the second appearance. He read it carefully, then nodded. "Tell them I accept." Pause. "But this time, I'm bringing my brothers." "Which brothers, sir?" the assistant asked. Traoré smiled. "The ones who've never been invited to speak." The second appearance wasn't just a return. It was a statement, a turning point. This time, Ibrahim didn't walk into the studio alone. Behind him came a quiet line of guests, men and women from Africa and its diaspora. A nurse from Bamako, a war orphan from Sudan, a professor from Dar es Salaam. Each carried a story. Each had been voiceless for too long. Mark greeted them, forcing a smile, but his nerves showed. The crowd noticed. Ibrahim shook his hand. "Thank you for having us," he said with calm respect. "We've brought some truths with us." No hostility, but the atmosphere was thick with history. They took their seats. The cameras rolled, and history began to change, right before the world's eyes. The nurse spoke first. She held up a photo of a burnt-down hospital in Burkina Faso. "Terrorists destroyed this," she said. "President Traoré sent supplies within 48 hours. No press release, no announcement. He just acted." Mark blinked, unsure of how to respond. Then the professor spoke. He revealed that his university had been at risk of shutting down due to funding cuts. To save it, he gave up his own salary for an entire semester. One by one, stories like this followed. No shouting, no theatrics, just facts. The audience was silent, stunned. Mark's expression had gone pale. This wasn't the segment he'd planned, and it was far from finished. Next, the youngest guest stepped forward. A boy, around 12, small and nervous, but with a quiet intensity. He cleared his throat. His French was hesitant. "I don't have a papa. I live in a camp," he began. Summit President Traoré came. No cameras, no motorcade, just him. Total silence. I told him I wanted to be a soldier. He said, "No, be a builder. Rebuild what they tried to tear down." The boy held out a worn French book from inside his coat. Ed gave me this. He gave me shoes, books. He gave me dreams. A tear slid down his cheek. Mark looked down. He had no comeback. Because something more powerful than ratings had entered that studio, truth. And Mark couldn't handle it. The mood in the room had changed. The crowd was no longer entertained, they were moved. That shift unsettled him. He slammed his hand on the table. "Enough of this emotional spectacle," he snapped. Gasps filled the room. "You're a president, not a preacher. This is politics, not a therapy session." But Traoré didn't react. He looked at Mark calmly and replied, "Perhaps you confuse power with noise. Let me show you what real power looks like." He reached into a folder, a live government report from Burkina Faso. Screens lit up behind them, displaying active reforms. Schools reopening, farmers receiving aid. No speeches, just proof. Mark sat speechless. The audience began to applaud, not out of habit, but from the heart. A backstage assistant was filming quietly with her phone. She captured the moment. Traoré turned to Mark and said, "History won't remember insults, but it will never forget impact." Within minutes, that clip was all over social media. Within an hour, 1 million views. By nightfall, 10 million. Across Burkina Faso, young boys in villages huddled around radios, replaying every word. In France, celebrities shared the video, awe-struck. Even critics had to admit, this man didn't yell, he simply stood. People cried not from pity, but from pride. At last, a leader who didn't perform. He proved. After the broadcast, Mark stormed into the green room. Hands shaking, he poured a glass of water. He'd misjudged Ibrahim Traoré. Not just the man, but what he represented. Truth, vision, pain, hope. The door creaked open. Traoré entered, alone. This time Mark said nothing. Traoré walked up and spoke quietly. "The world doesn't need more loud men. It needs brave ones." And with that, he left. Mark sat down slowly, staring at the now empty chair across the room. He didn't know it yet, but his life had just changed. So had millions of others. By morning, the video had spread across Africa. In Ouagadougou, an old man wiped his eyes. "That's my president," he told his grandchildren. In Paris, a young girl hugged her mother. Looks like us. He speaks with heart." European media scrambled to shape the story. Some said Traoré was too emotional. Others called him unpredictable. But none could deny one thing. The people were rising behind him. At the presidential residence in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim sat with his team. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't celebrating. He was thinking, because something larger had begun, and it couldn't be undone. His phone buzzed, an unknown number. He answered. A quiet voice in broken French. It was Mariam, a nurse in northern Burkina Faso. "I don't know if this is really you," she said, "but thank you. My son watched your video and said, 'Mama, I want to be like him.' I've never seen him so proud to be Burkinabe." Ibrahim's voice cracked. He said just 2 words. "Thank you." He looked out the hotel window. The Eiffel Tower gleamed in the distance, but his heart was in Kaya, in Dori, in the dusty streets of Bobo Dioulasso. This wasn't just a broadcast anymore. It was about dignity. Mark hadn't slept. He kept rewatching the video, again and again. He had mocked a man who stood for something real. Millions had heard his voice speak through pain. Yet the world didn't cancel him. They simply looked away. That indifference cut deeper. In the studio, producers spoke in hushed tones about replacing him. His ratings were slipping. Then, he made an uncommon choice. He went live again. No audience, just him. Staring straight into the lens, he said, "I disrespected a man who stood for something I didn't take the time to understand. I was arrogant. I was wrong. The video didn't trend, it didn't flood the internet, but Traoré saw it. He smiled, softly, not out of victory, but because, finally, the truth had been spoken. Across Africa, people didn't just watch that moment. They felt it. In Accra, university students gathered with handwritten placards. "Ibrahim, you spoke for us." In Bamako, elders sat by radios, quietly nodding as the broadcast replayed. Even in refugee camps scattered across the Sahel, children repeated his words, mimicking his calm tone with pride. In the streets of Burkina Faso, people came out, not in protest, but in unity. There was no anger, only dignity. The same youth who once felt forgotten now waved flags with confidence. Traoré never spoke to gain applause, but the world offered it anyway, not because he asked, but because he earned it. A woman from the village of Fada wrote a letter to the presidency. She never expected it to be read, yet it reached him. "President Ibrahim," she wrote, "my son died last year in a terrorist attack. We buried him without a flag. Today, I saw you on that French program. I cried, not from sadness, but because for the first time, I felt seen. Thank you for making us proud of where we come from." A grieving mother. Ibrahim held that letter for a long while. Then, quietly, he stepped into the courtyard of his hotel. He looked up at the night sky and whispered for all to hear, "I will not stop." 6 days after the interview, Traoré returned to Ouagadougou. There was no red carpet, no music, but tens of thousands lined the road, not with signs, but with a silent gesture, their right hands placed gently over their hearts. Even the children stood motionless. As Ibrahim stepped off the plane, he looked at the crowd and simply nodded. No speeches, no slogans. He had already said all he needed to. That quiet moment, a leader returning home, walking among his people, became the most shared video of the year. He hadn't fought with rage. He stood with dignity, and the world listened, permanently. If this story moved you, don't scroll past. Tap like if you felt even one tear. Comment below with a single word, respect. Subscribe for more stories that honor truth, dignity, and African strength. And please, share this story. Let the world remember that men like Ibrahim Traoré still walk among us. Thank you for watching. Long live courage. Long live Burkina Faso.